I'm glad you brought up the tropes because obviously a lot of Hinduphobia, actually pretty much all of Hinduphobia to a large extent, has its roots in colonialism. So obviously you spoke about caste. Now, what are some of the other colonial tropes? I mean, caste is probably going to be the biggest one, but what are some of the other colonial tropes that you've seen on these in these memes in these different platforms that are being used to denigrate Hindus?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So this is not something that we explicitly explored in our paper, but
Okay.
it's certainly something that we did talk about kind of in the background.
Hmm.
So I think the first thing to really understand is that British colonial propaganda was one of the most sophisticated forms of anti-Hindu disinformation. Our paper, of course, studies anti-Hindu disinformation today,
Right.
contemporary. But just in the same way that this disinformation is being spread right now over social media and messaging channels, the same way in the 1800s and indeed into the 20th century, this disinformation was sown by various actors in newspapers, in books, in official legal documents, things that the common community in Britain would have had access to. And the motive behind this disinformation from the point of view of the colonizers
Hmm.
was to showcase to their audience at home that indeed that there was a civilizing benefit for them to be staking so many resources in India, both in terms of personnel, right? There's men who are leaving Britain and staying in India for years at a time, right? Who
Hmm.
can't see their families. There's money that is being spent. There are soldiers who are going over. So in all of these ways, the home audience needs to be convinced that there is indeed some benefit for a British presence in India. And of course, that happens through this idea that the people who live in India are heathens, they're uncivilized, and so we, the British, are coming in and we will save them. This is
Hmm.
something that permeates a lot of the writing that you see coming from Britain when it studies or purports to study India. And one of the most famous examples of this is James Mill's book, the British History of
Hmm.
India, which was one of the most influential books when it comes to the West's understanding of India as well as Hinduism. So much of the disinformation that Mills spreads through his book actually argues that Indians and Hindus in particular. So he's not interested specifically in Hindus, but because
Hmm.
Hindus are such a predominant group within India, and because Hindu culture, thought, etc., informs so much of Indian culture, it was a central focus of his, kind of just by the very nature of things. So he argues that Hindus were, by their very nature, in an uncivilized state, primitive and in need of saving. And you see him use kind of examples like sati
Hmm.
to make this argument. And we see similar arguments about Hindus being in an uncivilized state very much through words like bajit, which means
Yeah.
somebody who, defecates in the street, right? So again, this idea that Hindus and Indians are backwards. Similarly, we also see Mill and others
Hmm.
think of Hindus as barbaric. So you have tropes like the Thuggis, who were a band of dacoits, as being inspired by Kali worship to commit murders.
Hmm.
So this idea of bloodlust, genocidal bloodlust, heretical evil within Hinduism also comes from that. That's also, by the way, used in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. If
Oh
you
yeah.
remember that famous scene of the Kali worshiper taking the heart
Right.
out
Yeah.
of the unsuspecting native, right? So these ideas percolate through society. I think that's a really good example of that, and we see these same ideas being used today as well. So genocide and bloodlust is again something that we see used as a characterization against Hindus in the memes that Prasiddha and the NCRI team looked at. And some of this, so there's very similar language that we see from the British colonists as we see online today as well.
Hmm. Priscilla, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think Parth said everything. Great.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you very much.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net.